Travel can be transformative. In this episode, we're chatting with Erin Lewellen, the CEO of Tilting Futures, who's on a mission to redefine the gap year and show how stepping outside the classroom can be one of the most powerful ways to learn about the world and yourself. From a life-changing trip to South Africa at the age of 22 to reimagining global education, Erin shares the transformative power of travel and how it can shape the leaders of tomorrow. I hope this episode inspires you to explore, learn, and grow beyond your comfort zone. And of course, embrace the unknown. Given Erin's work, please share this episode with a young person in your life and encourage them to visit tiltingfutures.org for programming information that will set them on the path to lifelong social impact. Welcome to The Thought Card, a podcast about travel and money, where planning, saving, and creativity leads to affording travel, building wealth, and paying off debt. We are the Financially Savvy Travelers. Erin, I'm so excited to chat with you today because on the podcast, we talk primarily about travel planning and finances and very nitty-gritty logistical. And I always get excited when I get to talk to someone about the impact of our travels and how transformative that can be as well. So I want to start off with, why is travel one of the best ways to learn about not only ourselves, but also others?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's critical to think about why you are traveling. So for me, it's about getting out of my comfort zone and getting into a learning mode. And I feel like when you travel, you're learning with all five senses. Everything smells different. You hear different sounds, you taste different things. Every piece of it is different, which makes you, I think, alive in a different way. That makes you open in a different way to experiences that are going to push you and teach you different things. That's one of it. You're just not in your comfort zone. Everything is different.
And everything is new in many ways, right? Like just trying to navigate to the restaurant or catch the bus or train, right? So there's something exciting, but it's also, I know it can be sometimes overwhelming to be bombarded with a lot of things going on at once. But for most of us, it's exciting, which is awesome. So take us back to that transformative trip for you that brought you to South Africa at the age of 22. Why, when, how, all the things. Let us know what that trip was all about.
Yes. And thanks for asking, because this is the year that fundamentally changed my life. So to go back, I'm from this wonderful blue collar family in tiny Cedar Flats, Oregon. My dad is a retired logger and my mom is a retired public school teacher. And I name these because for me, growing up in a blue collar family is core to who I am today. And my childhood was pretty incredible. And I just felt this need to know the world beyond the small town. And I thought college at first was going to be the way to do that. And for financial reasons, I went to the wonderful University of Oregon, which happened to be in my backyard. It turned out to be a real gift. And from there, I got this opportunity. A donor had set aside a fund, and it was called Global Graduates. If I could get an unpaid internship anywhere in the world, they would pay for me to live while I was there for the duration of it and to get there. And that fundamentally transformed my sense of self and my sense of the world. My first big city I ever lived in was Cape Town, South Africa. And I volunteered in a nonprofit focused on supporting survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. But I lived in a house with 4 South African women, all from different backgrounds. And it changed my life fundamentally. I feel like we can get into anything you want to cover here, but really there were 2 levels of change for me. One was my understanding for how interrelated our challenges are. And I was connecting dots globally that I hadn't seen before. And I was doing it, I was learning and unlearning more at a core level rather than an academic level. And I think the second one is the depth of humility that I was able to achieve that actually turned into courage. And I realized I could do really hard things, and sometimes they're going to turn out and sometimes they're not going to turn out. And that's okay. I can still go do more hard things. And those are complementary forces, humility and courage. They led me to the role I'm in now. And I feel very lucky to be in the role I'm in now. And I know we'll talk about that later.
So much of your story I can relate to because I also, in college, I saw opportunities to study abroad and to do volunteer trips. And for me, the biggest roadblock was the finances. And I feel like at the time, I didn't necessarily have the resources or connect to the resources to know that there's opportunity beyond that. So the fact that you found a program and you took the initiative and you did it is like so inspiring. And I think for all the younger listeners who are listening right now, I think that's important, that taking initiative. And now I feel I have a lot more tenacity where it's like, it's not I can't, it's like, how can I? But back then it was like, I can't. And then the dream just kind of like fell apart. So I would imagine that a lot of people kind of feel that finances could get in their way sometimes of pursuing that travel dream.
Absolutely. I mean, vividly remember walking into the study abroad office at the University of Oregon and looking at the price tag and thinking, who can do these things? So then I went and looked at other opportunities that some of my friends were doing. And I thought, what? How are they doing these things? I just had that was not happening for me. But I was on the hunt. I was looking everywhere, high and low. And I'll tell you, when I saw that little blurb around what I had to do was secure an unpaid internship, I was like, this is something I can do. And for me, it was about just keeping my eyes open, and I consistently was looking for it. And I think that's a piece. I mean, now things are a little bit easier to find, but at the same time, it can feel overwhelming, especially when you go look at the tuition, some of these places, some of these programs. I think it's important to just keep looking.
Absolutely. Now, I think also what's important to mention is that there are travel opportunities throughout your, I would say, young adult life, because there's the term called gap year. If you are in school, perhaps you can do a study abroad program. There's a lot of different ways that travel could come up beyond just vacationing. So would love to define a gap year, what that is for folks, and also why perhaps between high school and college could be the perfect time to fit travel, work, career planning all into one amazing experience.
Yeah, I think we often have these different transition moments. I would say any transition offers you a moment to take stock and maybe do something a little bit different that makes you think differently. And travel can offer that, as we talked about earlier. Sometime between the reason we focus on the gap year and that age of 17 to 21, right after you've graduated high school, but as you're an emerging adult, is because that's the time when you're really forming who are you? What do you want to focus on in your life? What gives you meaning? What gives you purpose? And to go have an experience that really stretches your perspective about yourself and the world at that age fundamentally can change the direction you take your life in. And it's a real opportunity to make sure that everything that comes next is built on a foundation that feels strong and also emergent. You're not static, you're dynamic. You're going to keep emerging and you're going to keep growing. And taking some time to really allow that to sink in as a way of life is the perfect way to set yourself up for that.
Yeah, again, it's like thinking about me at that time, it's exciting, but it could also be a little bit nerve wracking to make this big decision to whether you want to go to Malaysia or South Africa. Like, I think a lot of young people, they may feel excitement, but a little bit of like anxiety, a little bit. Like, my husband always says, like, as long as you're excited and the butterflies are flying information, like that to me is like a good kind of litmus test check for yourself to be like, this is the right opportunity. So, for the Tilting Futures program in particular, can you walk us through what is the program about and how, if someone who's listening to this would know that either, they're someone young in their life could be a good fit for this, or either themselves, like, hey, this could be a good program for me. How do we figure out if this is the right opportunity?
Yeah, thanks for asking about Tilting Futures, which I feel very lucky to lead Tilting Futures, especially given my background and how I wake up every day figuring out how to get more young people to be able to have an opportunity like I had. So, our North Star is to equip young people from all over the world with the skills they need to create meaningful social impact. And we've served thousands of young people from all over the world. And each year, we select a group of young people aged 17 to 21. So that's our sweet spot. And we bring them together either in South Africa or in Malaysia to spend several months living together as a global community, learning from social impact leaders in one of our two current theme areas. So one of the themes is human rights, and one of the themes is environment and sustainability. They do an apprenticeship where they get hands-on experience apprenticing to local leaders doing incredible work in those communities that they're living in. And then we wrap the entire experience in a curriculum that supports the young folks in our program to maximize their learning. And the program is a semester in length. And the idea is that you finish this semester and you either then go to college with a better understanding of yourself and the world and what you want to learn about, or you return to college. About half of our young people are in college. They take this semester to do this program that is called a Take Action Lab. And then they return to college with a new sense of both themselves and maybe more purpose behind what they're studying, so they know where they want to head afterwards.
That direction is so critical during this time, right? Like having a transformative experience and having the direction, the enthusiasm, the will to impact the world, to do something amazing. I think that is so key and critical. And on your website, tiltingfutures.org, you have quite a few stats listed, which I think really just brings everything in and drives it home. Some of the stats you have is that 98% of tilters said that they can better relate to people of different races, nations, and religions. 96% of tilters said they become more hopeful about the future. And 93% of tilters feel better prepared to make the most of higher education. So I think that all those stats just also paint a deeper picture of what's happening to these tilters, these cohorts of young people. So can you talk a bit about the impact and what you're seeing as a result, not only immediately after finishing the program, but also maybe years following your tilters, years on? What were they able to accomplish and do?
One of our focus areas is measuring the impact of this type of opportunity. And it's important to us because we want to make sure that we're building an evidence base around experiential learning in a global context, because our ultimate goal at Tilting Futures is that every young person who goes to college gets an experience like this as part of getting their degree. That's our big goal, is that higher education will adapt a bunch of the best practices that we are developing and proving evidence for, proving the impact evidence for, and begin to incorporate some of this type of learning directly in. So you're not actually having to have a kid walk down to the study abroad office. Rather, a part of getting your degree in sustainability is that you do a semester immersed somewhere else with a global community, having a hands-on experience that really bolsters your learning and your skill set. So because that's our goal, we have a couple of research teams that we work with. We work with one originally at Harvard as part of the human flourishing department, where they really are trying to study what creates human flourishing. They helped us develop our baseline, the way we study the impact of this. And now a team of researchers at UC Berkeley continues that, and they just did our first control group. So a group of young people who did our program, they're years out of the program, and a group of people who didn't do our program and they're years out from their experience. These are people who applied to our program but weren't able to participate and were put on our wait list. So the results are really exciting. They're, the young people who've had this experience have a greater sense of self-awareness. They have a greater feeling of being part of a global community. They're more likely to work on areas of social impact. So maybe not all in nonprofit. However, even across sectors, they are actively working on issues that create meaningful social impact for other people. The other finding was that they had reduced prejudicial attitudes. So the reason that we have a third party measure this is because it's one thing to ask a young person, how do you feel like this impacted you? But it's quite another to have a study with a control group showing that this type of opportunity truly does change the way a young person thinks and will continue to think across their life.
So powerful, very, very powerful. So we are definitely a money focused crowd. And we talked a little bit about how money could be a big concern for travel experiences, but I'd love to chat about some creative ways to fund a gap year experience or to fund a really unique travel experience like going with Tilting Futures. Any thoughts, any ideas there?
Well, I would start with just saying that I would seek out opportunities that also offer a financial aid component. So for us at Tilting Futures, we have a tuition-based model. And when you apply, you can also apply for financial aid. And that is core to every cohort that we build. We're lucky that we've had the ability to provide financial aid for young people so that we can really curate a diverse class across all kinds of different metrics. And financial is one of them. So I would encourage you to keep looking for places that do offer financial aid. The second one that I would say is if you're going to take a gap year, you don't have to be traveling your entire year. You could work for a stint that could help you save and then be able to travel. And you don't have to travel too far. Sometimes it's intimidating to travel too far. You could choose to travel somewhere that gets you out of your comfort zone, gives you a different experience, but maybe isn't so far that financially it feels out of your capacity at the time, especially if you're a young person.
And everything you just shared are things that you will continue to use throughout your life as a lifelong traveler, right? Finding a possibility, finding ways, and not feeling necessarily, not limiting yourself to, I think for me, a big thing I've been working on is like travel doesn't have to look like one particular type of way that we've been conditioned to think of what travel looks like. So breaking free of that definitely opens you up to new opportunities and helps with the finances piece as well, which I truly appreciate.
I agree with that. And I would say your podcast on trips versus vacations was a big part of this thinking for me. I really enjoyed that. I actually listened to it with my wife, and she said, this would be great for us to decide together before we go, are we taking a trip or a vacation so that we have aligned expectations? I thought that was very smart. But I do think that we envision sometimes that travel as an American, we might imagine it at a resort, at some fancy place. But for me, travel is very different than that. And so I think I've had those experiences. I love those experiences. I would put them on the vacation side of things. But when I think about a trip, I think about taking public transportation. I think about signing up for the local walking tour. I think about how do you stay in a neighborhood rather than in a hotel? How do I think about where I'm eating that's not at a fancy 5-star place, but rather what are the people around me eating and how can I engage in that way? And that really changes the financial outlay for that type of experience. And I would argue increases the impact of that trip on you personally. And so there's a learning component to that too. And I think that they actually are quite linked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny because that trips versus vacations episode, I wrote that article like in 2015. In the very beginning of my travel journey, I went on a big trip when I was 2015 to France. And I was noticing that there's a disconnect sometimes. Like some experiences are very fulfilling. And then there's some experiences that you're like, oh, I'm exhausted or oh, I'm drained, you know? So, all of this to say, I think these are great things to think about when whether you want to do a gap year or you want to craft a cultural immersion experience for yourself. So, all important things. Now, I'd love to pivot a little bit to talk about traveling in South Africa. What about South Africa did you enjoy at the age of 22? Now connecting to your present day, you find yourself going back, you find yourself building community, you find yourself there again. So what about South Africa makes it such a unique, interesting, and place that keeps calling you back?
That's a great question and hard to sum up. I will try my best. I think when I was there at 22, I'm dating myself, it was 1999. And so it was about Nelson Mandela had been in power for about 5 years. Well, had been freed and emerging as a leader for about 5 years. And I think that the moment then around the people that I was living with was so optimistic and hopeful in how the country could emerge from the apartheid regime they had been living under and what was possible. And there was this power of possibility. And I think in that moment, for me, they were doing things in South Africa, human rights wise, that we still weren't able to do in the United States. And I think breaking my own understanding of America in my mind, I had grown up with such an Americentric attitude. It's the water that I swam in. And then seeing, whoa, there's a lot of ways to do this and a lot of ways that prop people up in different ways or protect people's rights in different ways that we don't do and probably should do, one could argue. And I was really learning from how they were thinking at the time around human rights. And what does that actually mean to think about a human and what rights they should have? So for me, it was the moment in time, I think, really broke open for me what it meant to think more holistically on that front. And I think that was very powerful for me as a young person. And South Africa is a rich place in terms of culture and community and beauty, both in the people, but also the literal physical surroundings. And so there's something there that it feels a bit magical when you're in it. And it's a complex place, just like every other place where there's positive and then there's challenging elements to it. But I think there is a richness of the evolution of a place that when you are able to tap into it really changes you. And actually, when I think about where we are right now as a country, we are in a place where how do we evolve? How do we move into a new place together? And we're in a time of rising polarization and where we can feel very divided. But when you've had a moment where you've been in a community that's faced something incredibly divisive and then come together, I think that there's an opportunity to keep reflecting on that throughout your whole life and think, okay, how are we going to move in a different direction as the United States? So there's something that feels very timely. It's like timeless, I guess, is timelessness in what I experienced in Cape Town. So that's sort of my personal journey. I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go with it, but it's also just an incredible place with a beauty that is really hard to put into words.
Yes, we're going wherever you're taking us. That's what we're doing today. So I'm getting like goosebumps just thinking about there's a lot of internal change that happens, but it impacts how you see, how you interact the world, and perhaps the changes that you want to see. I know from my personal experiences, like when I go and travel, I come back home and I'm like, wow, we could do this better. Or, that runs so much smoother there, for
Yes,
many
yes.
reasons, right? So, yeah, it's quite interesting. I'd also love to talk about some of your favorite things to do in Cape Town specifically and just across the board. If you have traveled across the country in South Africa, anything that you think that our listeners would really enjoy and want to check out for themselves.
Definitely. So, first, the food in Cape Town is incredible. So, I would encourage you to really make sure you get a good, diverse restaurant. I would just dive in, is what I would do with the restaurants, the food scene there. And that's in Cape Town specifically, because that's what I can speak to. I'm sure it's great everywhere, but that's what I can really speak to. And then the second thing is, one of my favorite things that I have done in South Africa is rent a car for 5 weeks and drive around. This way you can get to places that are harder to get to public transportation wise, and then just get into a community and stay for a few days to better understand what makes this community tick, and then move to another one. But I think there's a richness in the in-between spots. South Africa has so many famous places, and we kind of drive from one to another, or we fly from one to another. But getting in a car and driving through it and driving up the coasts and then getting into the Karoo, which is the desert part of it, I would just encourage you to go to the in-between parts of South Africa, which I think can really give you a different type of glimpse.
Are there any smaller villages or towns that come to mind that you can share that you had incredible experiences you can share?
We went to the Wild Coast and it was incredible. And we did a 4-day horseback trip with a group. It was the local community had put together. They were trying to find an alternative economic engine to mining. And so they had put together these eco opportunities where you could go. And so we were horseback for 4 days, and it was unbelievable. I would encourage anyone to go up to that part of South Africa. There were very few people, and it was a mixture of sort of this desert, but also the ocean. And you were away from the cities and the bigger towns, but you were also among people. So it wasn't necessarily completely deserted, but it just gave you a very different feel for South Africa. And that's one of the rich parts of South Africa, is it really has everything. And so I would encourage people to go get out into a place where there's less city and hubbub.
Erin, this was so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories. And thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing at Tilting Futures. Like, it's very important work. And again, I wish I had access, but I'm happy to support at this older age. So thank you so much for all that you do. Where can we connect with you? And if anyone is interested in your accelerator program or your program, where should they go? What's next steps for them?
Absolutely. Go to tiltingfutures.org and you'll see everything there. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect. So please reach out. And if you've got a young person and you want to just talk about what their options are, I'm happy to talk about Tilting Futures, but also other options that exist that might be a great source of learning for your young person.